I swung my mop and smacked the homeless man in the head. "Get away from this bench." This was my first job ever, and my manager Gary was watching through the store window with his arms crossed, because his one rule was, nobody sits on that bench. But the homeless guy didn't run, and my jaw dropped when he sat right back down. Then he checked a watch, way too expensive for a guy who sleeps on benches. I grit my teeth because he was destroying my number of homeless people deterred. I jabbed the mop in his face, but he leaned out of the way without looking up. So I grabbed his arm and pulled with everything I had, but he still didn't move an inch, like he was bolted to the bench. Gary banged on the glass, mouthing, "Hit him again," and I needed this job. So even though my hands were shaking, I choked up on the mop like a baseball bat and wound up the biggest swing of my life. I swung hard, but that's when the homeless guy caught the mop mid-swing with one hand, like he was Superman. He looked me in the eye, and my whole body went cold as he stood up. He was way taller than he looked, and he walked me backwards towards our store while I stammered apologies. Gary sprinted out screaming and stopped dead because the homeless man said his full name. "Gary Huckle, your employee just smacked the owner of this store in the head." My soul left my body. "But you look genuinely homeless. It's not my fault." He ripped the mop out of my hands and smacked both Gary and me in the head. "You're both fired." I was doing squats at 4 a.m. to stay awake because a kid at school had told me, "You grow taller if you never sleep." I was already on night 3. I marked my height on the doorframe to measure my growth, but my heart sank when the new line came out dead, even with night 1. So I whispered, "I won't accept being short." I dragged myself to the window for air, and my whole body went cold when I saw a boy in my school's hoodie under the streetlight, staring up at me. I screamed at him, "Wait, you look taller than me. Tell me what's your secret." But he started walking, and by the time I ran out my door, he was already at the end of the street. So I sprinted until my chest was burning and the streetlights smeared together. But the gap between us just kept getting bigger. Sweat ran into my eyes, so I blinked. But when I opened them back up, the boy was standing on the curb in front of me. My hands started shaking. My eyelids slammed shut on their own again, and when they opened, his hood was an inch away from my face. I heard him say, "Don't blink, you're almost there." I grabbed his hood and yanked him around, and my jaw dropped because his face was gray and he had the same black circles under his eyes as me. That's when I looked down at his shoes, and they were floating an inch above the road. "What night are you on?" he asked, and my throat locked up so tight I barely got out. "3. I'm on 400, he said, and his hand clamped around my wrist until my fingers went numb. I ripped my arm loose and ran back towards my house, and I didn't stop until I slammed my front door behind me. I dove into my bed, dragged the blanket over my head, and squeezed my eyes shut. I'm going to sleep. I'd rather be short. In the morning, I checked the doorframe. A fresh pencil mark sat a full head above mine, with night 400 under it in handwriting that wasn't mine. When the doctor told me I had lung cancer and a less 5% chance of survival, I wanted nothing more than for my wife to hold me. But when I drove home and told her, she went quiet before standing up and saying, "I'm sorry, I can't do this." She walked out of the house, and I sat there shell-shocked. I went to call her and ask if she was serious, but she'd already blocked my number. I spent the next week getting sick in the bathroom all alone when suddenly my doorbell rang. I opened it with the taste of vomit still in my mouth and saw a man in a suit. "I'm representing your wife in the divorce." He gave me divorce papers, and as I looked through, I realized my wife wanted the house, the car, and all our savings, arguing she needed them more anyway. I cried all night, trying to accept I was going to die, but then I saw my wife kissing another man on social media and decided to fight. But during my first chemo session, my wife walked in with her lawyer. She slid a pen and papers. "I just need you to sign this, honey. Easier to do it now than when you're too weak to lift the pen." It was the first time I'd seen her since. I went home feeling nauseous, but when I twisted the key, it wouldn't work. That's when my wife looked out from the upstairs window. "This house is technically in my name. I changed the locks." She threw boxes of my things outside the window. I cried and yelled, "I'm sick. I have nowhere to go." But she just shrugged. "That's not my problem." I walked to a homeless shelter with as many boxes as I could, throwing up along the way, and when court came around, I was in chemo going bald. She took everything and left me to die, but I didn't. My numbers climbed, and I kept a picture of her beside me at every chemo session. Because I hated her so much, I wanted to live just to spite her. 2 years later, I was cancer-free and got the keys to my own apartment. It was tiny and crammed, but I'd made it. But 3 months later, I came home and saw her in my apartment, hanging photos of us on the walls like she lived here. She smiled at me and my stomach turned. "I've been thinking, we should try again." I didn't even know what to say, but she brought her face inches to mine. "My new husband cheated on me and I have nowhere to go. I know I made mistakes, but everyone deserves a second chance." She leaned to kiss me, and I instantly backed away. "Are you insane? Get out." I ushered her out the door. She broke down crying, "You can't kick me out when I'm at my lowest." But I laughed. "That's literally what you did." Her jaw dropped as I slammed the door and took down all the photos. "I hope she gets cancer." I was watching a movie with my best friend when he shifted on his couch and said, "Oops, Oops, I pooped my pants. I choked on my soda and whipped around to face him. What are you talking about? There's no way you actually pooped your pants in your living room. He shrugged like I'd asked him about the weather. I pooped my pants, man. It happens. It happens. I pulled my feet up and pressed myself into the armrest. Why would you do that? He raised one finger like a teacher explaining something simple. I was aiming for the toilet seat. I threw my arms out at the TV and the carpet. Dude, we're in your living room. There is no toilet seat in here. But that's when he slowly raised his hand and pointed right under me. I turned my head downwards. There was a toilet seat on the sofa cushion under me. It had been there the whole time, and I'd watched the entire movie sitting on it without noticing. My whole body went cold as everything clicked. Turns out, he really did poop himself in his own living room. I jumped away, but he stood up, patted the seat, and said, "Finally, now I won't miss." My brother grabbed my hand and pulled. "Come on, dude, we're right here. You said you wanted to make friends." I stood outside the frat house while the music blared, my legs planted into the ground because I was too nervous to go inside even though I wanted to. "I'll stay out here, man," my voice shook. "But you go inside." My brother came over and hugged me. "Listen, man, there's too many baddies in there for me not to go in. Take a few minutes and come in when you're ready." He turned and walked in shouting, while I stood there gripping my jacket, feeling like a loser who's never going to have friends. I was going to just walk home because I'd failed again, but then I saw a man in a ski mask and a gun creeping around the side of the house. I instantly hid in the bush, my heart pounding, as he looked around the yard I was just standing in. Nobody was there, so he loaded his pistol and slipped in through the front doors. My whole body froze as I watched him raise his pistol in the hallway. He fired a round into the ceiling, and everyone instantly screamed. He yelled, "Everyone against the wall," but then my brother stepped towards him. "Hey man, we're not scared," but the man immediately fired again. The bullet hit the glass bottle in my brother's hand, shattering it and cutting him. I watched my brother go pale and back up against the wall while the man laughed. "You're scared now, aren't you?" He raised his pistol at everyone, and that's when I stepped out of the bush. My stomach screamed, "Turn back," but my legs were already moving. The armed man ripped his mask off. "Nobody here wanted to invite me, so now everyone here is going to pay." His gun landed on my trembling brother first. "Mr. Not Scared here goes first." I watched him cock the trigger, but I was already at the porch steps, sprinting with everything I had. His back came within reach, and my feet left the ground as he placed his finger on the trigger. I tackled him before he could squeeze. The gun slid across the floor as people instantly started restraining him and beating him. I stood up hyperventilating, and my brother instantly pulled me into a hug. "You're a hero!" someone shouted. My brother lifted me on his shoulder as the whole party chanted my name. I walked into Granddad's hospital room and saw him hitting a rectangular device with smoke rising from his mouth. I ran over in horror and gasped because Granddad had a giant smile on his face. I ripped it from him. "How many did you take?" "Like 4. The nurse left it here and told me to have some." I gripped my head in horror because how could a nurse do that? Granddad's eyes were already red as he ran his hands over his hospital gown. "Wow, I can really feel everything. This medicine is amazing." I told him to calm down, but he was already licking his lips. "I'm really hungry though." He gripped his railing and suddenly stood up for the first time in 6 months. My eyes widened as my horror turned to amazement. "You're standing, Granddad!" But he wasn't even responding and just walked towards his hospital roommate, who was eating his tray of food in his own bed. I realized what Granddad was doing and reached for him. "Granddad, no!" But he was already picking the mashed potatoes out of his roommate's tray with his hands. "I've never tasted mashed potatoes so good." He smiled and picked more. His roommate was delirious and barely noticed him, and I dragged Granddad back to his bed and slammed the nurse button, having no idea what to even think. But when I turned around, Granddad was again hitting the pendulum. I took it from him, and he dropped to the floor, his eyes deep red as he hysterically laughed at the ceiling. The nurse ran in, and her mouth flung open immediately. I raised the pendulum at her. "This is your fault. How could you give it to him and tell him to take some?" My voice shook, but the nurse frantically shook her head. "That's not mine. I told him to take his medicine." She pointed at the still full cup of pills Granddad had knocked over in his hysteria. My brain rattled as I stared at the pendulum while Granddad's laughter filled the air. Then where did this come from? Me and the nurse looked at each other, and that's when Granddad's roommate slowly raised his head from his tray of mashed potatoes, his eyes glowing red with a goofy smile. I knew I'd left it somewhere. He started laughing just as hard as my Granddad. "I was organizing my Pokemon cards when my girlfriend picked up my childhood Charizard and dangled it like it disgusted her. 'You're a grown man. Why are you still playing with kids' toys?' I snatched it back before she could bend it. I pulled this when I was 7, and collectors still offer me stupid money for it." She trailed after me, waving at all my cards. "It's embarrassing. Just get rid of it before somebody comes over." I slipped it into my pocket where she couldn't reach it. "I'm never selling this one." The next morning, she stood over over my shelf with her coffee. It's a pile of useless garbage and you know it. I ran my thumb over the binder. This got me through the worst year of my childhood. That afternoon, I caught her flicking my cards into a bag while she watched my face. On Friday, she pointed me out to her friends across the living room. I swear he still collects Pokemon cards like a little boy. My face went hot while they laughed, but I kept my hand pressed over the Charizard in my pocket where it had been all week. Monday, my phone buzzed with a text from my buddy at the card shop. "Yo, isn't this your whole collection?" She dumped it all online for $40, and my hands went cold. I called him before I even stood up. "Buy it all back right now before someone else grabs it." I came home to an empty shelf, but she didn't even turn around. "Relax, you needed to grow up anyway." I nodded and let her think she'd won. The next morning, I told her she was right. It's about time I grew up and sold this kid stuff. She practically skipped to the shop with me. I laid my Charizard on the counter, and my buddy turned it over in his hands. "This one's worth about $9 grand. She stood there with her mouth hanging open while he counted it out. She reached for the cash, but I zipped it into my jacket. "That's the deposit on my own place." She grabbed my arm as I turned for the door. "I really thought you'd never sell that card." So did I, but it just saved me from this relationship. I walked out while she stood there with her hand still open. I was walking toward my favorite spot out on the city pier when I heard the breaking boards beneath my feet. Then, with a sound like a volcanic eruption, the entire left side of the pier collapsed at an angle, sending everyone stumbling, including me. Great, I thought. First I get fired and now this. What else could go wrong today? I guess I spoke too soon. While everyone else on the pier was able to maintain their footing, I went right over the guardrail and onto the beach 30 feet below. As I fell, I just prayed the sand was soft enough that I'd survive. When I opened my eyes, I assumed I was dead. I was still on the beach, but standing over me was the ghost of my father, who died more than 3 years ago. I stood up and looked myself over. I was still flesh and blood, still very much alive. I suppose I had to be hallucinating my dad's ghost. It made sense. I was fired from the engineering firm that he helped build from the ground up, so of course I felt like a failure. Then I heard another crack and the entire pier came down a few more inches, followed by a new round of panicked screams from above. The ghost pointed to the problem, a failing support beam. If a total collapse happened, people could die. Then he pointed at the driftwood lying around the beach. When I was a kid, me and my dad would collect driftwood to build castles. Little did I know, these were my first lessons in how to build things, so that eventually I could take over the family business. Suddenly, my engineer brain took over and everything made sense. I knew what had to happen. I collected as many logs as I could find along the beach and lined them up along the broken beam. Then I took off my belt and cinched it around the group of logs. I pulled the strap on that belt as hard as my muscles would physically allow, and suddenly the beam snapped back into place. The pier was once again level, and the people on it were safe. I looked back at the ghost of my father. He simply put his hand over his heart and then dissolved into the darkness. When I got back to the pier, I was hailed as a hero. I went on to start my own engineering firm and have been #1 in town ever since. I walked out onto the stage in front of 300 people, sat down at the piano, and took the deepest breath of my life. I looked up at the only seat in the room that was empty. It was my grandma's. She'd sat in the 3rd row for every recital since I was 4, in the same brown coat, with the same little wave when our eyes met from the stage. Tonight she was supposed to be there too. She'd circled the date on her kitchen calendar the day they printed the program. She'd be waiting in her car at 6 in the morning, every Saturday, ready to drive me into the city for lessons. She'd hum along to whatever was on the radio, off-key, and pretend not to hear me beg her to stop. I missed practice for the first time when she didn't wake up and gave the world her last breath. The song in front of me was 6 months of pencil and erasing and starting over, the only thank you I had left to give her. I closed my eyes, and I began. I lifted my hands off the keys, and the hall didn't make a sound. Not for a long time. Somewhere in the back, a woman was crying. The host walked to the mic to call up the next girl, but she was already in the front row shaking her head. She knew there was nothing left to play. I walked down off the stage. I walked past the rows of people who'd never met her, and I sat down in her seat. I dragged my sleeve across my face. The 3rd row was full now. I hope you heard it, Grandma. My wife started taking orders from our cat's litter box. It began when the smart box alerted her at 11 one night, and her sister announced announced a pregnancy the next morning. 2 weeks later, another alert woke us at 4, and that afternoon, my uncle died. Joyce opened a notebook, wrote down both times, and whispered, "Wayne knew." Within a month, every bathroom trip became a warning. If Wayne went once, we stayed home. If he went 3 times, she packed our day with errands. I missed my dad's birthday because the cat had been too quiet, and when I laughed, she shut the notebook. You don't have to believe him. You do have to respect him. The hallway became a command center, with charts taped to the walls and red arrows connecting timestamps while Wayne slept beneath them. On our anniversary, I stood by the door in a clean shirt, while Joyce sat beside the litter box arranging 3 months of logs across the floor. Wayne went 4 times today. Something's coming. I told her what was coming was our reservation, but she asked for another hour, so I ate leftovers alone. A week later, I found pumpkin treats labeled for digestive health and gave Wayne one with breakfast. His schedule shifted. Joyce built bigger theories, and 2 months later, with 14 relatives around our Thanksgiving table, I hid the bag under my chair and waited. Before anyone carved the turkey, Joyce tapped her glass and held up her phone. Wayne went 5 times last night. He's telling us today will change this family. Her mother slowly nodded. The pregnancy thing was strange. Joyce's brother agreed. Then another relative asked what 5 usually meant. My hand closed around the treat bag under my chair, and for 1 second I wondered if the truth would matter anymore. Then I set it beside the cranberry sauce. I've given him these every morning for 2 months. His schedule changed because of fiber. The room went silent, but Joyce pointed at me. He warned me you'd sabotage our connection. Her father lowered his fork. Joyce, it's a cat. Wayne wandered in, jumped onto the empty chair beside me, and started licking his paw. My phone buzzed with another litter box alert, so I held it up. The prophet has spoken. The day before I was due to leave for my 5-year prison sentence, someone knocked on my door. I opened it to 2 detectives who were already inviting themselves into my home. "We have a job for you that can make your prison sentence go away." We sat at the table, and he folded his hands. "We're trying to arrest a mafia group, but we don't have any evidence of crime." The other detective smiled. "That's where you come in. Wear a wire tonight and get the job on tape." He slid me a photo of a man that looked identical to me. "This is the guy they hired for tonight. None of them have ever met him. They only know the stories, so that's who you'll be impersonating." I nodded because I knew there was no way I could go to prison, and they taped the wire to my chest. "Great. Head over to the corner right now. They're waiting for you, James." I walked out, and a black van rolled up, and the door slid open. "KLK Manuel." I walked in, and El Gordo in the driver's seat turned around, and his gold teeth were flashing. "Tonight, we kidnapped the accountant who stole from me. You in?" I rolled my shoulders back, forcing myself to seem confident. "Yes." Flaco leaned in. "Why you sweating, hermano? You've done this 100 times. Every eye turned on me. "I just slept with another woman last week, and I don't want my wife to find out." For a second, there was silence, but then they all clapped me on the back. "Classic Manuel," I smiled. "So what's the plan tonight?" They explained everything to me while we drove, and I made sure to throw my head back so that the wire could catch every word. The van stopped and masks came over the seats, so I pulled mine on too, thinking the police would be there when we arrived. But the second we stepped off the van, footsteps came up behind us, and a man stepped into the streetlight wearing my face. It was the real Manuel. He pointed right at me. "Who is this?" Every gun came out, and El Gordo went quiet. "The real Manuel has the flags inked on his forearm." Manuel ripped his sleeve up to expose his crossed tattoos. Every gun swung to me, and the circle closed. El Gordo grabbed my collar. "Let me show you what we do to rats." Suddenly, the street exploded with light. Cops swarmed from every shadow and put everyone face down. The detective handed me the document that read, "This citizen is relieved from their status as a prisoner." "Nice work, Manuel." I shook my head. "It's James." I was working at a factory, holding a piece of burning hot metal, when my boss ripped the safety gloves right off my hands. The hot metal dropped to the floor. I yelled, "Hey, I need those. I almost burnt myself." He ignored me and threw my gloves in a trash bag. "New policy. You all work without safety gloves now. Real men work with their bare hands." My palms were already burning from the heat. My coworker Joe yelled, "Boss, someone can get seriously hurt." He laughed. "Then don't be stupid." He walked down the line and snatched the gloves off every worker. We all knew this was a disaster waiting to happen. Within days, workers already had second-degree burns on their hands. Another guy had to be hospitalized after a machine took his pinky off. Joe held up his bandaged fingers. "Boss, we need the gloves. Someone's gonna lose a hand." The boss didn't even look up. "Shut up, be a man and work." But I wasn't about to lose my hand over this dumb policy. So that night, I snuck into his office, pulled a pair of gloves out of the trash bag, and hid them in my backpack. Every day after that, I'd secretly slip them on when he wasn't looking, hoping he wouldn't catch me. One afternoon, I heard the worst scream of my life. I turned around and saw Joe. His arm was caught in the metal press. Guys immediately ran over to pull him out, but the metal was burning hot and sharp as a blade. They couldn't touch it without shredding and burning their own hands, and the boss just stood there, frozen. No one had gloves to help. Joe was screaming for someone to save him. That's when I remembered the gloves in my backpack. I yanked them on and grabbed the burning hot press with both hands. It seared and sparked, but the gloves held. I pried it open and pulled Joe's arm free. Paramedics rushed in to take over, and one of them grabbed my shoulder. Another minute and he'd have lost the whole arm. "You saved it." A safety inspector showed up to investigate and got angrier by the second. "There isn't a single pair of gloves in this entire factory. Who's responsible responsible for this. The whole floor looked at the boss. I spoke up. He is. He said real men work with their bare hands and band gloves. The boss stood silent. They handcuffed him for every injury he caused. Days later, Joe came back to visit. His arm was wrapped in a brace, and he carried packs of safety gloves for everyone. Me and my sea crew were hauling treasure chests across the ocean when we heard a scream. I dropped the rope I was holding in shock. I hollered, "Pirates incoming! Keep the Queen's gold safe!" My entire crew scrambled to protect the treasure chests, while the ship slammed into our side, hooks bit our rail, and dozens of pirates poured onto our deck screaming at the top of their lungs. They tied us up and held us down to poles on the ship, and their biggest man hauled our first chest into the sunlight, wedged his axe under the lid, and cracked the seal open. My whole body froze with fear, because the gold belonged to the Queen, and if they stole it, the Queen's navy would hunt down this ship and hang every last one of us. Their captain strolled through the spilled gold. "The booty's mine, the ship's mine." He pointed at me and the other strongest men on the ship. "Get these dogs row for me now." His crew started unchaining us, and I raised my voice over their laughter. "Put it back, all of it. Sail away, and hope that Her Majesty never learns your names." The captain crouched down and pointed his hook at me. "Make him walk the plank." I gulped and tried my best to stay calm. A pirate pulled me up by the shoulders and shoved me towards a plank. He pointed at the ocean. "She's real feisty today. She'll have you dead in no time." My entire crew was forced to watch as I slowly put one foot in front of the other. The captain grinned. "Dead men tell no tales." And while my left foot hovered over the icy water, I heard screaming behind me. I turned around and their lookout shrieked, "Sail ho! The Queen's navy is here!" A warship 5 times our size filled the horizon. It had cannons locked and loaded and was ready to kill us all. The captain's grin died and he shrieked, "Put it back! Put it all back!" And grown pirates started shoveling doubloons into chests with their bare hands. One pirate knelt on the deck pressing 2 halves of a seal back together, and I leaned my head against the mast. "You can't unbreak a seal." He took out a gun and got ready to turn it inwards. I was walking to meet my friend when suddenly I stepped on a loose manhole cover and fell straight down into the sewer. I screamed and landed hard in freezing water. When I looked up, the manhole I'd fallen through was way too high to reach. I yelled, "Help! Somebody!" But no one saw me fall in. Then I heard a deep rushing sound getting louder. Before I could move, a wall of water slammed into me and swept me down the tunnel. As I was being dragged, I wondered how the hell was I going to get out of here. The current dragged me through the dark, slamming me into the walls. I went under and swallowed the nasty poopy water, kicking as hard as I could just to get my head up because I couldn't swim. I tried to reach for my phone to call for help, but it was gone. The water had ripped it right out of my pocket, and I had no way to contact anyone. Then I saw a ledge up ahead and attempted to grab it, but my body slammed into the concrete and I felt something crack in my ribs. I screamed but pulled myself up anyway, inch by inch, until I was finally out of the water. I laid there soaked and shaking. I had no phone, no way out, and the manhole was probably a mile behind me by now. Nobody knew I was down here, and I thought I was going to die being covered in poop and pee-pee. But then I heard voices above me. "Hey, he's down here!" And a flashlight hit my face. Firefighters lowered a rope and pulled me up out of the sewer. When I finally got to the street, gasping, my friend was standing right there. "Dude, you smell like but you're alive." I was confused. "How did you even know I was down here?" "I saw the whole thing. I was waiting for you across the street when you just dropped into the ground and I called 911. The firefighters said it took so long because the water swept me so far." I almost cried of relief until my friend held up his phone. He'd recorded me falling and laughed. "Is it okay if I post it?" The principal slapped the vending machine. "This thing isn't getting refilled until every last snack in it is finished." The entire cafeteria groaned because it was filled with off-brand chips and gummies nobody even wanted. I raised my hand. "I volunteer as tribute." Everyone turned to face me, and I kept going. "I weigh 430 pounds. Eating is what I'm good at. I got it." The entire room watched in silence as I took out $50 worth of candy and finished every piece in 2 minutes. A kid's jaw dropped. "Whoa." Another kid near the front slid his dollar into the machine and dropped a chocolate bar on my table. Then another kid did. Then 10 more lined up behind him, feeding the machine and stacking snacks in front of me. The principal crossed her arms by the door. "No way you can keep going." But no one was listening to him, and chaos broke out. The jocks carried me onto the lunch tables and called it my throne. A girl kept my cup full of water, another stacked napkins by my elbow, and a kid I'd never met flipped the breaker so the cafeteria went dark and the principal couldn't see what we were doing. People ran back to their lockers for spare change until the whole school was out of money, and that's when 2 jocks started punching the glass. It cracked, then shattered, and they reached in with their sleeves and handed me everything inside. I was still eating when I saw red and blue lights pull into the parking lot. My fingers were covered in chocolate when they walked us all outside and shut the school down for the day. When we came back the next morning, a brand new machine stood in the corner, but nobody was lined up for the snacks anymore. They were lined up for me. The fat kid saved us. I rubbed my belly. 430 pounds of pure goodness. Told you I got it. I told my doctor I was having terrible stomach pain, and he replied, "It's probably nothing." But after he ran my scans, he turned turned to me with a pale look. He said a printed x-ray on his desk. It's stage 3 stomach cancer. He told me we needed to operate before I could even react, and I signed the paperwork in a daze. I got prepped for the operation, and the anesthesia mask went over my face. But then I woke up minutes later. I tried to move my fingers or open my eyes, but nothing worked. I heard the doctor from earlier, and his assistant scrubbing in nearby, talking about opening me up. I was terrified and tried to scream, but no sound came out. But then suddenly, the doctor's voice changed. "We'll take the left kidney." I froze, and the doctor continued. "We'll take a piece of his liver too. Pocket the 100,000, and he walks out tomorrow thinking we cured him." The assistant asked, "What about the cancer story?" The doctor replied, "He's got a scar. He's got a recovery plan. He won't know it was just a stomach bug." I realized they were trying to harvest my organs. I tried to move my legs, my arms, but nothing worked. I heard the doctor pick up a scalpel, and I prayed for my fingers to just move because I didn't want my organs harvested. Suddenly, one of my fingers twitched. Then my whole hand opened. The doctor lifted his scalpel over my stomach, ready to make the first incision, but I shot up on the operating table. I slapped his hand away and immediately ripped the IV out of my arm. I sprinted out of the operating room and ran down the hallway, past the stunned nurses, and burst out the front of the hospital still in my gown. Having my organs still intact felt so good I completely forgot about my stomach. I was on the school bus heading home when the bus driver suddenly grabbed his chest and let out a painful grunt. He slumped forward over the controls, and the bus powered off under his weight. We stopped dead on the train tracks, unable to move. I panicked and immediately ran to the front, pressing my finger to his wrist. He barely has a heartbeat. Suddenly a kid screamed, and when I looked down the tracks, I saw a train far off in the distance heading our direction. I knew this track was only for automated cargo trains, meaning it wouldn't be slowing down. We needed to get out. We tried to move the driver off the controls to start the bus. "He's like 300 pounds, he won't move." I gripped my head in horror as the train got closer, and then I heard a bang behind me. Brian had punched through the back window and was screaming for everyone to get out. We climbed through, and the second my feet hit the gravel, I grabbed my chest, breathing again. We'd made it, but the train was closer now, and the driver was still slumped behind the wheel. We looked around at each other, and I screamed, "We have to push." Brian shook his head. "What if we're not fast enough and the train runs over us?" But I threw my palms against the back of the bus and pushed. That's why everyone has to help so that doesn't happen. All my classmates started pushing the bus, all of us risking our lives, but the wheels were jammed against the rails and wouldn't roll. I screamed, "Everyone lift." All 20 of us got our hands under and lifted. My back screamed in pain, but the bus came off the ground an inch. Now every second person let go and start pushing. 10 kids let go, and the pain doubled across my back. They pushed, and the bus rolled off the rails. I let go and screamed, "Now everyone push." My vision blurred, my veins popped. The train horn blared, but we shoved the bus clear and jumped back from the tracks, right as the train drove by. I dropped to the grass, heaving. The bus driver was still slumped in his seat, but we'd risked our lives for him. He was alive. The whale was tracking my little brother's hand through the glass when the kid behind us chucked popcorn at the tank and yelled, "Eat up, Shamu." Tommy didn't turn around. "That's not Shamu. Her name is Luna, and orcas remember faces." The kid laughed and held up another handful of popcorn and launched it into the tank. "She gonna remember me, whale boy?" Tommy's hands trembled on the railing. He'd loved orcas forever. Mom worked 2 months of doubles for these seats. His smile disappeared, and I saw him clenching his fists. Some rich kid was going to ruin it before the show even started. His 2 friends started cracking up. "She probably likes the popcorn, bro." The kid stood up, leaned over the rail, and dumped his soda and popcorn box into the pool. "Hope she likes Sprite too." Tommy spun around, his whole body shaking. "Stop, you're going to kill her." The kid laughed and shoved Tommy in the chest. Tommy hit the railing and slid to the floor. The 3 of them stood over him, howling. That was it. I jumped up to show them what happens when you mess with my brother. But that's when Luna let out a low call and disappeared under the water. 2 seconds of nothing. I froze on the steps. Then she breached right in front of them and slammed her tail like a thunderclap. A wall of water hit all 3 in the face. One slipped and went down screaming. They ran out drenched and crying. A trainer rushed over. "Are you okay? She's never done that. She picks her people." Tommy walked to the glass. Luna rose to meet him. He pressed his hand to the glass and she nudged it back. "Told you," he said. "Orcas remember faces." I was in my room when I caught a smell of something burning. I rushed to open the door and saw the entire downstairs glowing an orange flame. The fire spread towards me and my chest locked up. But when I reached into my pocket, my inhaler wasn't there. I tried to just run, but a giant pillar fell in front of me and blocked me. And when I ran back to the window, I realized the concrete driveway was too far down to jump. I opened the window and screamed, "Help!" But the crowd of people outside our 10-foot gate just stood frozen in shock, watching my house burn. I felt the air get hotter as the smoke was now pouring under my door. My asthma made every breath feel like suffocating, and my lungs gave out. I slid down the wall and pressed my face into the carpet because the air was supposed to be clearer here, but all I felt was a crushing heat in my lungs. I began gasping, and that's when I heard glass shatter downstairs. I tried screaming help, but no sound came out, and suddenly a heavy thud rang out outside my room. My door flew open, and a teenage kid kid stumbled in, covered in smoke and dust. He ran over and scooped me up, his hands blistered and burnt from the hot pillar he'd just shoved out of his way. His left arm hung at a wrong angle, and the skin on his face was peeling from the heat. But he didn't slow down. He carried me out the burning front door, and we dropped onto the grass. The crowd was still outside the gate, watching through the bars. I clawed at his shirt, still choking. My inhaler. I need my inhaler. And that's when he dug through his pocket and pressed his own inhaler to my lips. I've got asthma too. I sucked in the oxygen and realized the only person who ran into the burning building to help me was a teenager with asthma of his own. A man with bloodshot eyes blocked me from getting on the bus and pressed a note into my hand. "Don't sit near the devil." I balled up the note and shoved past him thinking he was some drunk. But when I tapped my transit card, I saw a woman in the third row wearing bright red plastic devil horns, and my grip tightened on the pole. I sat a few aisles behind her, and the man was pressed flat against the outside window, pointing at her with both hands, mouthing the word devil over and over. I opened the window to ask him what he was talking about, but the bus started moving, and as the man got smaller, I saw tears streaming down his face. I subtly leaned down the aisle to look at the woman, and her eyes were already locked with mine through the crack in the headrests. Her hands were gripping something so tight in her purse that her knuckles were white. I texted 911 with shaking thumbs, and the reply came fast. "Can you see a weapon?" So I crept 2 aisles up and peered between the seats, and in her bag was the outline of something metal. Her eyes were locked with mine, and when they dropped to the phone in my hand, she grinned. "I'm going to kill us all." I typed yes, and the second I hit send, she was out of her seat with her arm around the driver's neck. The bus swerved left and right, and everyone was screaming. My phone buzzed against my palm. "Officers at the next stop, stay in your seat." But when she dug into the bag, I knew I couldn't sit still. I dove up the aisle and wrapped both arms around hers, pinning the purse shut against her chest while she thrashed and howled in my ear. The driver stood on the brakes. The bus screeched into the stop, and the jolt ripped her out of my arms and threw me into the seats. She grabbed the weapon from her purse and turned toward the passengers. Bang! An officer stood in the open doors with his gun raised, and she crumpled against the window, grabbing her wounded arm. Everyone poured out onto the sidewalk while 2 officers hauled her off the bus. I dug the note out of my pocket, smoothed it flat against my leg, and handed it to the officer taking my statement. He read it and went quiet. "That's her husband. He's been chasing this route all morning trying to warn people. Every call we got today was about him, not the woman." I put my hand over my little brother's mouth to keep him quiet. We were awoken in the middle of the night by the flash of emergency flares and the sounds of footsteps outside of our tent. We had no idea what was happening. The zipper at the front of the tent began to fall, and my brother screamed hard against my hand, but I was able to muffle it. When the flap opened, the full beam of a flashlight blinded us both. When our vision returned, we recognized the figures holding them almost immediately. It was our parents. "Get up." Their tone was pure panic. "There's no time to explain, we have to go now." I removed my hand from my brother's mouth and helped him up. Just then, we heard a noise that couldn't have been human. It sounded savage and primal, and worst of all, it sounded like it was 10 feet away and closing. We came out of our tent to see a 10-foot grizzly bear standing across the campfire from us. It was foaming at the mouth and moving unpredictably. Great, it's rabid too. The rabid bear charged forward straight through the campfire, sending pieces of burning wood flying, and pinned my little brother to the ground. "Oh Jesus God, Caleb," my mother cried. "Son, look up." My dad pointed into the air just above the bear. Our family's camping supply crate hung suspended over a tree branch. This tactic was supposed to keep bears away, but it sure got this one's attention. "Hurry, do something." My brother was using all of his strength to keep the bear's jaws from touching me. The crate was staked to the ground about 5 feet from where I lay. I knew I wouldn't make it to the rope in time myself, so I pulled out my pocket knife, opened the blade, and made the throw of my life. The blade grazed the side of the rope. It was tattered, but not broken. The bear's jaws were lowering on my brother's head. Without another thought, I grabbed a piece of burning wood the bear had scattered and hurled it at the weakened rope. A spark landed exactly on the last strand, and the whole thing snapped with the sound of a bullwhip. The heavy supply crate dropped straight down onto the bear's head and shattered into splinters. The bear was knocked out. Together we pushed the unconscious bear off of my brother. Then a searchlight lit us up, accompanied by the sound of a helicopter. A voice over a loudspeaker said, "Parks Department Rescue Division, we saw your flare. I'm dropping a ladder now, you folks will be all right." We were flown to the nearest hospital, and we would never return to that campsite again.
বস, আপনি কিন্তু আবার রাগ করেন না। বুড়ি বেড়ি বয়স হইছে মা। থাকো তুমি, তোমার লগে পরে কথা কইতেছি। হ্যাঁ, সাইকেলের চেনটা এখানে এসেই পড়ছে।
ভাই ঠিক হয়ে গেছে।
কিরা তো জলদি ঠিক হয়ে?
কিং জানে জামশেদ চাচা খোয়ারে ধরে নিয়ে গেছে।
কি কইলি? জামশেদ চাচার খোয়ারে নিয়ে গেছে মানে? তাও ফকিন্নির পোলা 100 টাকা কম দিস, বুঝছস? তোর নাম?
মৌ।
কি নাম?
প্রিয়া।
প্রিয়া।
জানালায় জোড়া চোর
একদম পরীর মতো দেখ।
কি কর সত্যি? নাম কি, বাড়ি কই?
আচ্ছা আমি যাইতেছি।
প্রিয়া।
ভাষা পেল কি কবিতার
ওই জামতলায় আপনার সাথে আমার মুখোমুখি সব কথা হবে, ঠিক আছে? গেলাম।
আপনার খোলা চুলে খুব সুন্দর লাগে, একদম কাজলের মতো। আর সেই জন্য সাইকেলের চেনটা এখানে এসেই পড়ছে।
ভাই ঠিক
কিছু হয় নাই, হবেও না।
হবে না তবে না, কি শুরু করছে বলো তো?
দেখছো কিং খান, প্রিয়া আমারে ভুল বুঝলো। কত শালার কপাল।
পেল কি কবিতার পাতা ছুঁয়ে মন জন পড়ে না পলো সন্ধে আকাশ।
গেলাম। প্রথম প্রথম তো শাহরুখ খানের মতো হিরোইজম দেখাইছেন, আর এখন মনের কথা বলছি।
কিন্তু নিজে জীবনে প্রথম একটা মেয়ের প্রেমে পড়ছি খান। তুই কিন্তু আমার কোনদিন আমি কিং খান।
আমিও প্রথম প্রেমে পড়ছি।
কবিতার পাতা ছুঁয়ে মন জনকি বেলা।
মায়ের হাতের রান্না কিন্তু আমার মা তো দিয়েছিলেন। শাহরুখের প্রত্যেকটা কি সমস্যা? শাহরুখের ভক্তরা যে এত ভীত হয় সেটা আমি আগে বুঝতে পারি নাই। প্রেমে পড়বেন কিন্তু গেলাম। প্রথম প্রথম তো শাহরুখ খানের মতো হিরোইজম দেখাইছেন, আর এখন মনের কথা বলছি।
কিন্তু নিজে জীবনে প্রথম একটা মেয়ের প্রেমে পড়ছি।
তাহলে আমার শাহরুখ খান।
বাহ, কিছুই থাকে না। তুই কিন্তু আমার
ফুলটা দেন, ফুলটা দেন।
শেষ হয়ে গেছে। শাহরুখ খান কইছিল আপনি জানেন আপনি আমার জীবনের প্রথম প্রেম।
দেখ, আমি তোর মা, আমি একটু হলে বুঝি।
কেট কেট করে ঘুমটা ভাঙায় দিলা, স্বপ্নটা নষ্ট করে দিলা। ডন সিনেমার একটা গুরুত্বপূর্ণ দৃশ্যের মধ্যে আছিলাম, দিলাম।
টাকা পাইলি কই?
তোমার বাদশা শৌচালয় না মুমকিন है मैं हूं।
আমি যাবো।
দেখতেছে আমার ভাল লাগে নাই। তুমি যারে পছন্দ করবে আমি তারই বিয়ে করবো। তুমি একটু